Hello, my name is Lucas Callan, and this is a historical timeline of bilingual education, focusing mainly on Texas and how Texas went about their bilingual education over the course of the last 200 years. So, to start things off, on the common schools in Texas, pre-1900s, starting in around 1836 is where a bunch of these little tiny schools started popping up, in these community-based schools. And these did not from bilingual education. There's a bunch of communities together. There was some Czech communities, Polish communities, German communities, Hispanic communities that were all together with one goal in mind, and that was, to educate their students. And with that, these communities were very much in charge of the schools that their kids were going to. So they were able to have a say in the teachers that they chose, the curriculum and stuff, because there wasn't that much of regulation going into these schools prior to the 1918s and to modern day. And so there was a lot of bilingual education for whatever that community was. And so moving on from that, once it got to 1819, there was an English-only curriculum law that was passed in the state of Texas, and this was sort of to help unify a statewide policy and kind of to Americanize the immigrants who were living in Texas. This was also needed to help establish a sort of professionalism in these community schools for these teachers. So that way there was like a state curriculum, and these teachers had actual guidelines to follow through with. And this stayed as a thing until Title VII bill was passed in 1968, and this gave schools funds for a bilingual education program whose first language was not English. And this also stemmed positive bilingual education laws across the state of Texas, because it no longer had kids be punished for using a language other than English in the schools. However, there were still some time needed to get this throughout the whole state, right? Because Texas is a fairly large state. So, in 1969, in Crystal City, Texas, there was a walkout of 100 different high school students at Crystal City because they were being punished for their heritage or speaking languages other than English, or bringing tacos to school, I think is what was said in the video that we had to watch for class. And was also said in the video was that the students felt as if the school was trying to make them more by making them less, which is not something that you want your students to feel like. So these 100 high school students walked out and protested their school for not letting them speak Spanish or languages other than English. And on the other side of that, there were some elementary schools, like Nye Elementary School in 1963, who were pushing bilingual education onto the students before this Title VII bill was passed. And around the same time as the Civil Rights Act started showing up, then some of these elementary school teachers and administrators were pushing for some use of bilingual programs in these elementary schools. But with Title VII being passed, there was a House bill in Texas, which was House Bill 103, which the whole purpose of this law was to repeal the English-only laws of 1918. So it was no longer that you could only had to speak English in your classroom. You could speak Spanish, you could speak Polish, you could speak German, whatever the case may be. And then with that, Senate Bill 121, it mandated that bilingual education be in elementary classrooms. And that kind of helped push the state of Texas to really getting their bilingual education programs starting at elementary and moving all the way up through to high school level and where it is today. And that's been a big part of this Texas Association for Bilingual Education group, or the TABI. It was formed in 1972, and the whole goal was to advocate for children in the institutionalization of bilingual education in the state of Texas. So they really pushed for this bilingual education programs, and they make sure that all of the bills are keeping the bilingual educations more effective, and that their implementation isn't getting lost or going in the wrong directions. And they're a big group that just continues to keep on top of the bilingual education for the state of Texas. Outside of Texas, in 1974, there was the Lau versus Nichols case, which, which said that the languages other than English could be used in your lesson planning or planning instructional responses for your student learners. And it was also ruled that the lack of supplemental language instructions in public schools violated the Civil Rights Act. So you couldn't deny someone because of their different language barrier, or because of a different language that they spoke. Which, this ruling was super important because it helped push other states into a more rounded out bilingual system as well. So the Aspira Group of New York City had another suit against the Board of Education of New York City because the state was not offering students of Latino or Hispanic heritage opportunities to really excel in the classrooms, just because they weren't offering these students a way to learn English that was effective for these students. These children were just put in a classroom and taught to learn English through immersion, which wasn't very effective for these students. They were falling behind. They were getting put into sped ed classes because they weren't able to keep up with their curriculums or courses, and it just caused a lot of bad problems all the way through there. And so with the ruling of Lau versus Nichols, the city of New York was forced and needed to add this adjustment where the children needed to be able to get their instructions in a language other than English if it needed to be done. And then here are my citations. I used some of the videos that we had and the book for my cases. That is all. Thank you.